Be me, 28 and feeling the pinch. Not the fun kind of pinch, the existential dread kind. Used to be the apex predator in every room I walked into my prime, my absolute peak, the center of the universe. I remember those days, only a few years ago, when hot girl summer was less a seasonal event and more a perpetual state of being, a philosophical declaration of my inherent value. It was a flawless, dazzling period of intense, unearned male validation. I was a goddess, literally. All those beta boys, all those simps who thought they had a chance, circling like pathetic, confused moths around a high-powered, high-voltage LED. I just basked in the warmth of their collective desire, choosing which ones to briefly illuminate and which ones to flick away like specks of dust from my pristine designer handbag. It was a game, a power dynamic that felt so inherently right and just. Because honestly, if you have the looks, you have the currency, and if you have the currency, you make the rules. The rules were simple: my pleasure, my exploration, my self-discovery above all else. It's not cheating, it's being true to my current emotional trajectory. My ex, poor guy, he just didn't get it. He was so caught up in outdated patriarchal concepts like fidelity and commitment and respecting the boundary we agreed upon. Ugh, the sheer audacity of that expectation. Like I was some possession, some delicate porcelain doll he could put on a shelf and expect to stay dust-free and untouched forever. That's toxic masculinity, pure and simple, trying to police a woman's body and her spiritual need for variety and experience. I told myself, and all my friends agreed, that I was simply breaking free from the suffocating cage of his fragile male ego. I was exploring my sexuality, expanding my horizons, asserting my autonomy. It felt revolutionary, like I was personally dismantling the entire systemic structure of male control one Tinder match at a time. The night I ended things, I remember feeling this rush of pure, unadulterated freedom. He cried, of course, the dramatic, weak creature. I just looked at his crumpled face and thought, your weakness is not my responsibility. Your inability to appreciate my magnificence and allow me to thrive is the actual problem here. I owed him nothing, absolutely nothing, because I am a woman, and my intrinsic value supersedes any temporary, transactional agreement, like a marriage vow or a promise of exclusivity. The years that followed were a blur of high-end brunches, spontaneous trips, and a steady stream of highly attractive, low-effort men. They were perfect for what they were, disposable validation sources. I never had to put in effort. The mere act of existing was enough to generate endless offers of free drinks, free dinners, and attention that felt like a warm, comforting blanket of pure ego inflation. I cultivated this persona, this perfect, unattainable, highly desirable goddess who occasionally graced a lucky man with her presence. It was exhilarating to know I held all the cards, that I could swipe left on a six-figure salary just because his chin wasn't sculpted enough, or ghost a guy with a great apartment because he used too many emojis. That's power. That's freedom. I looked down on the women who were desperate for commitment, the ones who were settling down in their mid-20s, buying houses with mediocre men. They were weak. They had succumbed to societal pressure. They had traded their potential for a boring, beige existence. I was different. I was the main character. I was living the hot girl summer lifestyle year-round, permanently refusing to be contained by the shackles of male expectation. I thought it would never end. I genuinely, delusionally believed that my attractiveness, my youth, my sheer magnetic personality were eternal resources, like sunlight or the tides. I invested everything into that belief. Gym, expensive serums, Botox, just a little preventive, not fixing anything obviously. The perfect, curated Instagram feed showing only the highlights, the peak moments, the endless stream of fun. I rejected the notion of building a future, or savings, or stability, because those were things for men to provide, or for weak women to worry about. My job was simply to be fabulous, and the universe, specifically the men in it, would provide the rest. I was living proof that women could have it all, which meant I could take whatever I wanted without giving anything meaningful in return. A successful transaction in my world meant I got the experience, the excitement, the resource, and the man got, well, he got to bask in my proximity for a brief, glorious period. That was his reward. And then I turned 28. The calendar date itself seemed insignificant, but the shift was subtle, like the first imperceptible drop in temperature before a harsh winter. It wasn't sudden. It was a creeping, insidious realization that the rules had changed while I was still playing the old game. The messages weren't as immediate. The guys were younger, and the really high-quality ones, the ones with actual careers and houses and emotional stability, were looking past me or treating me like a nostalgic fling instead of a serious prospect. I started seeing the ones I had casually discarded, now married or engaged or just gone from the scene, their attention locked down by some younger, less complicated woman who hadn't spent the last 5 years proudly burning bridges. I tried the usual tactics, the flirty texts, the slightly revealing photo, the spontaneous suggestion of a late-night drink. And instead of the immediate, frantic, enthusiastic response I was used to, I got, "Sorry, busy tonight," or "Can't, early meeting tomorrow," or worst of all, just nothing at all. A silent, empty void where validation used to be instant. My internal dialogue shifted from triumphant self-affirmation to aggressive justification. "It's the patriarchy," I screamed silently. "They can't handle a strong woman. Men are all shallow. They only care about youth. They are dogs. They are weak, pathetic, emotionally stunted children who fear my independence." I doubled down on the feminism, reading more articles about the injustice of the male gaze and the societal limitations placed on female desire. But deep down, in the quiet, empty apartment I was still renting, a tiny, cold voice whispered a truth I couldn't bear to admit. My currency was depreciating. The thrill of the chase was gone, because I was starting to look like the one chasing. I needed to pivot, to execute a strategic retreat, to secure the resources I had previously deemed beneath me. It was time to transition from hot girl summer to settling down, but still superior, fall. I decided I needed a man, a proper man, one who was successful enough to afford the lifestyle I deserved, but emotionally malleable enough to accept my past and cater to my future needs. The key was finding one who hadn't yet been corrupted by the toxic red pill ideology that seemed to be spreading like a bad rash among successful men. I started scanning my professional network and the fringes of my social circle. I wanted someone who saw my adventurous past as a sign of spiritual richness, not a red flag. I found him, or at least I thought I did. He was 35, a successful architect, great apartment downtown, drove a nice German car, impeccably dressed, and crucially, he was single, which I immediately interpreted as, "He's waiting for me." Let's call him the target, because that's all men are, really, targets for the achievement of female needs. He wasn't overly enthusiastic, which I initially found annoying, but then I spun it. He's secure, he's mature, he respects himself too much to fawn. I decided to deploy the soft approach. I cleaned up my profile, archiving the most suggestive photos and replacing them with pictures of me volunteering. Once, for an hour, but who needs details? And looking contemplative while holding a book I hadn't read. I sent him a calm, measured, "I've been working on myself" message. I hinted at a turbulent past, framed as, I had to go on a difficult journey of self-discovery to truly know what I want now, which is just code for, I cheated and wasted 5 years hooking up, but I'm ready for your resources now. He responded politely, professionally, but with this bizarre, maddening emotional detachment. He agreed to a dinner, a nice place, which he insisted on paying for, which I took as a win, the first sign of submission. But the conversation was all wrong. He wasn't asking about my feelings, or my growth, or complimenting my outfit enough. He talked about his work, his hobbies, complex, tedious things like woodworking and sailing, and asked me specific, practical questions about my job and my life goals. I tried the vulnerability card. I talked about how hard the dating scene was, how men were so afraid of commitment, how I was looking for something real, now. I watched his face, expecting the usual reaction, the widening eyes, the eagerness to step up and be the savior, the declaration that he was different. But he just nodded, slowly, almost clinically. He said, and this is the part that made my blood run cold, "That sounds challenging. Most people find that the quality of relationships often reflects the quality of self-awareness and self-respect they bring to the table." It was the calm, neutral tone that killed me. It wasn't an attack. It was a statement of fact. delivered with the emotional weight of a weather report. I pushed back, using the rhetoric I had mastered over years of online arguments. I explained, with great detail and righteous indignation, that men needed to stop being so judgmental of women's pasts, that slut-shaming was a tool of the patriarchy, and that my history proved I was passionate and exploratory, not damaged. I thought I had him. I thought the sheer force of my politically correct aggression would make him apologize and submit. Instead, he smiled, not warmly but professionally, like a dentist who's just found a small cavity. He said, "I completely agree that everyone deserves respect, and I respect your choices. I simply choose partners whose historical choices align with the kind of future I'm building. It's a pragmatic filter." Pragmatic filter. The phrase echoed in my head, sterile and terrifying. He was treating me like a bad investment, a car with high mileage and a salvaged title. I spent the next 2 weeks trying to break through that wall. I initiated contact daily, sending funny memes, asking about his projects, trying to weave myself into the fabric of his incredibly neat, well-organized life. I offered to cook for him, a gesture that for me was the equivalent of a marriage proposal since I almost never cooked. He declined politely, saying he had meal prep figured out for the week and didn't want to disrupt his routine. I tried to engineer a meeting, suggesting a spontaneous coffee during his workday. He replied with a 5-line text explaining his precise, hour-by-hour schedule, stating that he used his lunch break for focused work and didn't have time for unscheduled social engagements. The sheer, maddening lack of emotional investment was a personal affront. Every other man I had ever known would have dropped everything, would have canceled a non-essential meeting just for the chance to see me. This man was prioritizing his schedule, his routine, his self over my desire for attention. It was infuriating, a violation of the established gender contract, where a high-value woman's time is the only thing that matters. I started getting desperate, which I recognized as weakness, but I couldn't stop. I cornered him at a mutual friend's birthday party, physically blocking his exit from the patio. I pulled out the big guns, the "why don't you like me?" interrogation, framed as an insightful conversation about emotional connection. I explained that I felt a powerful, undeniable spark, and I couldn't understand why he was resisting this cosmic connection. I put on the perfect, wistful expression, the one that used to make men fall over themselves to console me and promise me forever. I told him I was ready for commitment, ready to settle, ready to choose him. I watched his eyes, waiting for the flicker of ego, the moment he realized he had won the ultimate prize, the high-value, previously unattainable woman, now offering herself up as a trophy. And that's when he outsmarted me. He didn't get angry. He didn't get defensive. He didn't even get emotional. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his mineral water, looked me straight in the eye, and delivered the execution. He summarized the conversation, confirming that I was seeking commitment and believed we had a spark. Then he said, "And I remember every single word. I appreciate your forthrightness. And you're right. You are ready for commitment now, which is a good thing for you." He paused, and I braced myself for the submission, the proposal, the final win. But he continued, "However, my commitment to myself is non-negotiable. I am building a specific life, and that life requires a partner who shares not just the end goal of stability, but also the process and the values that lead to it." I started to interrupt, to deploy the final ultimate manipulation, the teary-eyed guilt trip. He held up a hand, calmly, gently, a simple, firm boundary. He continued, "I know your dating history, not because I've researched it, but because you've proudly shared the highlight reel of your independence and exploration. I see a pattern of high-risk, low-investment behavior, prioritizing immediate gratification over long-term trust." He used the word trust with a cold, almost surgical precision. He continued, "I have observed that when things get easy for you, you get bored. When things get difficult, you seek external validation. I am not interested in being the reward after your adventure is over, nor am I interested in being the safe harbor you retreat to when your hot girl summer finally runs out of fuel." The audacity, the sheer unmitigated nerve of him to analyze me, to treat my life choices not as spiritual journeys, but as predictable, poorly executed financial decisions. He finished with the sentence that obliterated my entire self-justification. "You are prioritizing your comfort, and I am prioritizing my peace. Those two goals are fundamentally incompatible, especially given the history you're bringing to the table. I wish you the best, but this is not a dynamic that serves my best interest, and my best interest is my primary focus." He was so calm, so centered, so utterly unaffected by my presence or my desire. He hadn't offered an apology, a defense, or an emotional justification. He had simply presented a rational, self-serving, and completely detached business decision regarding his own future. He was walking away, not because I wasn't pretty enough or smart enough, but because my past behavior signaled too much future risk for his personal balance sheet. My entire reality shattered. I couldn't call him a misogynist because he was too polite. I couldn't call him insecure because he was too confident. I couldn't call him controlling because he was simply controlling himself and his own choices, refusing to let me control him. He wasn't playing the game by the established rules of male deference and female entitlement. He was playing an entirely different game where the goal was self-preservation, not female validation. He wasn't waiting for a woman, he was waiting for the right woman, and he had the self-respect to walk away from one who was clearly, strategically, looking to settle for him. The humiliation was absolute, total, and soul-crushing. I stood there, momentarily paralyzed, watching him calmly walk back inside to his other friends, having spent maybe 3 minutes ending what I had hoped would be my resource acquisition for the next decade. I realized I had spent my most valuable years building a brand that was attractive for quick, shallow encounters, and now that I needed stability, that brand was my greatest liability. The value I had placed on my looks and my freedom was worthless to a man who valued his peace and his future more than he valued a temporary relationship with a once hot girl with a complicated self-inflicted history. My hot girl summer didn't just end, it defaulted on its loan. I walked out of that party alone, my mind raging with entitled fury, trying to find a narrative that painted him as the villain. But the only thing I could hear, ringing in the silence of my ride home, was the cold, clinical truth. He didn't submit. He didn't chase. He didn't care enough to even argue. He just calmly, rationally, went his own way, leaving me standing there, revealed for exactly what I was, an entitled, insufferable cheater whose sexual currency had expired, demanding payment in full from a man who had already secured his own financial and emotional independence. And the worst part was, I couldn't even text a single one of my pathetic ex-boyfriends to complain, because I knew, with sickening certainty, that he was absolutely right. The long winter had officially begun, and I had no resources saved up to survive it. The self-pity, the raging entitlement, the sheer unfairness of it all, it was a tidal wave of bitterness. My body, my choices, my autonomy, my explorations, they had all culminated in this moment of pure, devastating rejection. Rejected not because I was flawed, but because I was calculable. He had calculated the risk, and decided the return was not worth his emotional capital. The utter selfishness of that man, to prioritize his own mental health and financial security over my need for a stable partner, it was a monument to the failure of modern masculinity. He was supposed to be the prize, the reward for surviving my own destructive behavior. And he simply turned his back on the entire notion of being a prize for a woman with my baggage. I swore I would find someone better, someone weaker, someone who didn't keep such a meticulous, emotional ledger. But the truth was, every man I was looking for was either already taken by the simpler, less damaged women I had once mocked, or they had learned the same lesson as the target, and had also gone their own way. I was left alone with my autonomy and my aging looks, realizing that the one thing I desperately needed, unconditional male provision, was the one thing I had actively, proudly burned down every chance I got. The insufferable feminist perspective was now just a bitter, empty defense mechanism against the reality that I had played myself out of the best options. The mirror didn't lie, and neither did the lack of immediate, frantic validation in my inbox. I was the victim of my own freedom, trapped in a cage of my own making, all because I believed my value was eternal and unearned. I will never forgive him for showing me the receipt for my past actions. Never. But I know, deep in the darkest, most terrifying corner of my conscience, that he was the only one in this whole story who acted like a truly mature, self-respecting adult. And that is the ultimate, unbearable insult. My hot girl summer was over, and I was alone on a cold, cold night, and it was entirely my fault. I hated that realization with every fiber of my being, but I couldn't deny the cold, hard logic of the man who simply chose himself. A lesson learned too late. A bitter, protracted, excruciating lesson in basic economics of human relationships. The rage, the resentment, the complete lack of self-reflection to truly change anything, it all boiled up into a single impotent knot of fury. I deserved better. Society owed me better. Men owed me better. But the target, the architect, the man who went his own way, he owed me nothing. And he gave me exactly that. Nothing. And I had earned it. The silence was deafening. The entitlement was the only comfort left. And even that felt cold and brittle, ready to crack under the weight of my impending loneliness. The Greentext was long because the bitterness was vast, the entitlement was endless, and the realization was slow, painful, and still incomplete. I was right, he was wrong, but he still won, and that's the greatest injustice of all.